Call the Tuesday, January 28, 2020 meeting of the Portsmouth City Council, which happens to be a work session, to order. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Battle?
Here.
Mr. Clark?
Here.
Mr. Glover?
Here.
Mrs. Lucas-Burke? Here. Mr. Moody?
Here.
Ms. Simmons?
Here.
Mayor Rowe?
Here. Deputy City Manager LaVor's Pace.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, good evening. We have one presentation and also an update, General Assembly update for you on tonight. This evening, the city's continuity of operations plan will be presented by Battalion Chief Justin Arnold. COOP is, as it is referenced, is designed as a guide to sustaining essential department functions in response to an emergency incident. COOP addresses the following disruptions to normal operations: loss of a facility or a portion of a facility, loss of services due to reduction in workforce, and loss of services due to equipment of utility failure. On the City Manager's report tonight, there is also a resolution for City Council's consideration relative to adopting the COOP plan. Mr. Arnold.
Before we start, I'll ask everybody to silence their phones.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. We were just joking in the back that it's nice to be before you with a project initiative instead of some impending horrible weather that could bring us wind and rain. So I don't feel this pressure. But I do want to tell you about a 12-month project that we just completed involving the continuity of operations plan, otherwise will be known as COOP, throughout the rest of this presentation. Looking back at several significant events over the last few years, one of those being Hurricane Florence, Hurricane Matthew, we really dove into what would happen if our essential daily services that help us run a very essential government service, if you will, beyond economic means, beyond city revenue streams, beyond that, how would we maintain those services if something catastrophic would happen to our hub? And really our hub would be City Hall or any other vital services around town. So with that, the continuity of operations plan began. The COOP ensures that critical services and functions can still be provided when normal operations are unable to be conducted. It provides flexible, scalable strategies to manage and recover from any event. Thank you. Any event, whether it be a large-scale hurricane, flooding event, snow, even a small fire in one of the divisions here. So it's very scalable. It can be the entire building. It could be one division. It could be a satellite structure. So it's really scalable, and it's very dynamic in how we can implement that strategy. It allows the city to continue to provide vital services up to 12 hours out or 24 hours out. We can put this plan into motion to really not skip a beat, essentially. And this is the ultimate promoting of resiliency and support as far as a whole community approach. So what it provides, the documents that we provided you to look through, again, it's very dynamic. Some of the information that was in there when we printed it has already changed. As soon as a department head would leave, that information has changed. A city strategy has changed, that document has changed. A department moves, that document changes. So it's constantly being reevaluated and edited to make sure it's meeting our needs. That's very current. In that document, it provides an application and scope. It provides an immediate hazard and threat analysis that it's up to date for us at that time. Is terrorism one of our major issues at the moment? Are naval facilities close by? Would that have an impact to us financially or economically outside of the gates? What are our mission essential functions, not only of the city, but each individual department therein? Your roles and responsibilities for all phases of the COOP. That would be from implementation from Jump Street of any catastrophic event that would happen, all the way down to the follow-up or hot wash afterwards of success and failures that were involved in the COOP implementation. It also delegates authority. That starts to who is in charge of the COOP relocation process. How do we get the funding for it? Who is the manager per se from start to finish throughout, and who transitions, once it's, quote unquote completed. What are the procedures for activations? Who do we notify? How do we implement? And then how do we return to normal operations once that's been completed? Devolution, or what is our backup or contingency plan? That's also involved in there. And our appendices that have our document templates that are FEMA guideline specific help us retain recovery costs or any type of reimbursements that we would get financially from the federal government or the state government. So it's a very comprehensive document from start to finish on how we would implement something from Jump Street. So we don't have to guess when our hour of need is there. So a regular day in our government, your 8 to 5 day, we show up, money's moving, people are being hired, people are getting paid. It's just normal day, right? Communications are good. Fire department and police department have what they need to carry out essential services. Trash is being taken care of. Public utilities and water is being, flowing. But anything could change on a dime. You could have an event in this building today, an active shooter. What if the IT department had a fire? How do we move on from that type of stuff? And that's really where the continuity of operations plan really highlights to give us comfort in our time of need, because it's a stress not only on the services, but us as a organization or a government. As we started to build this, the unfortunate events of May 31st, 2019 happened in the city of Virginia Beach. Myself and my team, Captain Joe Rubino in the back, and Dave Topsinski, our emergency planner, who was actually working part-time for Virginia Beach at that time. We learned of the call that Friday afternoon. We did not self-dispatch based on we knew the need the next morning. Needless to say, around 7:30 that morning, we received our call to come in and assist them, and we were there for the next 10 days. Their COOP operation, they did not have one in place. So they were right off the hip, how do we move 387 employees from Building 2 and all their essential services therein, almost identical to this building in makeup? How do we move those to 28 different locations across the city, right? So you can see the timeline here. They had 387 employees, overall 85,000 square foot of long-term workspace that was very established. This had their permits and inspections, their planning divisions, their public utilities, their public works, their IT hub in the basement, just like we have on the second floor. All their essential services, for the most part, were involved in that building. So how do we reset that as a city? So Saturday morning at 6:30 a.m., that COOP operation began, less than 14 hours after the first 911 call for shots fired. Their core planning team created and met for the first time. They identified available space throughout the city. And when I say available space, we're not talking about an empty office area. We're talking about, do you have a spare cubicle? Do you have a conference room that I could put 7 laptops in? This was an unbelievable, thing to watch for us. It was very humbling. And when I say workspace, there were areas where you had maybe less than 2 feet of workspace, and that was your space moving forward. So it was very eye-opening. We think of office space as something comfortable, something that we could, it's our space. But this was something very different. By Sunday, June 2nd at noon, city leadership was briefed on the relocation plan that involved these 28 locations. The plan was approved shortly thereafter, and implementation begun. All spaces were occupied by June 17th. So those 28 locations that were temporary were moved, people were relocated, and those essential services were back up by the 17th of June. And this was a city that did not have a functioning COOP plan. So this was something that was shot from the hip, and in 17 days, that's a lot of work to get done very quickly. Their ongoing stuff, and this again was something that we just learned last week. We talked to the COOP manager from the city of Virginia Beach. So far, their planning department, they moved 132 staff. They needed 20,000 square foot. They've leased that building. They've built it out to their needs. They've moved in, and they were in by August 16th. So close to, June, July, August, 3 months out, they had their solid workspace back. Their IT department, 68 staff members, they needed 10,000 square foot. They had at least built out and moved in October 18. They're still to this day using the basement of Building 2 with some of their IT stuff that they've been unable to move. And that's very tough for those individuals to keep going in and out of that building. It's still a crime scene. It's still, fenced off. So it's something they've worked to get past, but they're still utilizing that space. 2 ongoing projects that they still have. Their Public Works Department, that's 184 staff. They're still looking for 25,000 square foot of space. They're exploring their lease opportunities, and their move-in day is to be determined. And their public utilities, 169 staff, they need $25,000, or 25,000 square feet, and they're still exploring lease opportunities. They've been approved $6 million for the 80,000 square foot, and they're looking at around 10 months still to get that accomplished. This was a very humbling exercise for us to be a part of. It was real time, real world, and it just showed that our essential services are the backbone of what we do. That's why we're in here creating these plans to make sure services move forward. But there's a human element in it as well. Some of these departments still have staff members that were unable to return to work. They still have some that are in mental health treatment programs. So it's really goes beyond just the physical facility needs, or how do we get people to answer the phone? How do we set up these networks? How do we find the space to move forward? There's a staffing component in it as well. Do we have the people to move forward? Do they want to return back depending on the emergency? So you take a hurricane. If their family life was wiped out and they don't have a place to live, more than likely they're unable to come back to work. And the same thing with the terrorist style attack. If there's a mental scar in that as well. So that's something that we were humbled, and we really opened our eyes up to, it goes beyond the structure itself and the essential services, but the people. And I open the floor up to you. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer.
Questions?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I see that Virginia Beach is estimating $6 million for 80,000 square foot space, but have we estimated how much space we would need if, you just don't know?
For us, we don't have the ability to build out per se. We're a very small city. We kind of have what we have as far as large spaces. So it would be very unique for us at that moment in time, because as of right now, I don't know of a lot of large buildings besides warehouse space that you could build this out from.
Right.
Not a lot of stuff on the waterfront that could take the size of this building without having to build a structure. So again, it would be very dynamic at that moment, depending on the incident and depending on the economic structure of the city at that time, where we could move and where we could operate.
It's also a function of what goes down.
Right.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the City Council, also I wanted to make a point. You all will have the resolution in front of you this evening, but the COOP in its entirety is not published because there's quite a bit of security measures and contingencies in that. And so it is not published in its entirety in accordance with state law, but because there's so many security and other personal information with regard to technology and some of those policing matters, it is not published in its entirety.
Good point. Bill?
Could some of our partners, like the port, even the shipyard, would they have space? Probably be worth exploring.
Yes, sir. We drill on that quite a bit. We have very good relationships with our military partners and our public-private partnerships, and we've had those discussions of space. It depends on the footprint that you would leave. So again, if it was a small department, that would be no problem to move over to the shipyard or maybe a building in the hospital. But you're looking at a massive scale of the whole building. Then we're talking about maybe even moving services to another city if it's located, just for that time being. So again, it's very dynamic of what the situation brings.
All depends
But
on
our-
the situation.
Yes, sir. And our partners they're all willing to help us.
Jen?
Yes, sir.
From a personnel standpoint, assuming that something catastrophic happened and the leadership of that's going to run the COOP program is kind of knocked out, do we have a contingency for that?
Yes, sir. It all passes down. So, example would be I would be the manager of the COOP initially, as directed by Dr. Patton, and then that falls down by division based on what's impacted and the size and scope again.
Sure.
So it would be Chief Hoffler would have a say in that of if it's just the planning department, it may be Mr. Baldwin. If it's just this department, it may be that department head or one of us to assist them as they get their needs met.
Sure.
But there's a scalable, size just with any local declaration. That delegation of authority is scalable.
Thank you.
The plan also sets out the devolution of authority.
Yes, sir. there's a contingency in there for what ifs.
Yes, ma'am.
I think two things. A, I think it's really important for the public to hear this and know that there is such a relationship within the region that you and other cities, Portsmouth and other cities in the regions, help Virginia Beach as they would us in a similar situation, and that those agreements do exist and work. And two, when I was flipping through a little bit of what you sent us, I mean, it's really drilled down to the who's going to pick up the paper clips. I mean, it's amazing. And things you don't think about. Yeah.
Right.
But you do now because of what you've been through.
And and to be perfectly honest, I don't think that plan, in 100 years of doing it over and over again, you're not going to hit 100% of it. And we saw that in Virginia Beach, and all the way down to power strips on the floor, or
Right.
and then the people brought up. So we got all these people moved into the space, and well, who's coming back? We don't know. So are you going to have 200 or 387 people come back to the spaces? So it was very eye-opening.
Wow.
Very eye-opening.
One other question. I guess it's mandated by the state for all of the localities to do this, and how many are already on board with getting their COOP plan
So
developed?
we're the first one tonight
Okay.
in our area that will have a binding COOP plan. Virginia Beach has theirs. They're going to vote on theirs sometime in the next few months. But we had already had one building up based on the needs. And just, again, Hurricane Florence taught us, what happens if a Category 5 hit us? So we had a lot of strategic, planning missions to what are we going to do if something happens and we're wiped, clean slate. Emergency planner Topsinski, he went to Hurricane Michael on the Florida Panhandle and saw firsthand what happens when your entire infrastructure is taken out. So he was a great asset to have building that COOP plan. And again, there's no radio communications, no way to pay people, not even a hub to, meet at. So very humbling process.
I don't think there are any more questions. I think we could conclude by saying thank you, and this emphasizes the need for plans. And during an emergency, that's not the time to try to figure out who does what.
That's right.
You need to have a plan, and we thank you for the professionalism that you bring to us every day.
Appreciate that. Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. General Assembly update.
Mayor, you have in your weekly box from Advantage Strategies for the City of Portsmouth. Tonight, Mr. Ashby will highlight a few of the updates contained within the report.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the City Council, tonight I'm going to cover a few of the updates for the week beginning January 25th, 2020, as it relates to legislation and progress being made in the General Assembly. One of the things of note that is currently being considered is House Bill 1108. Delegate Sally Hudson has put forth a bill that discusses what's been a historical issue for many local governments and local government attorneys, and that is the imposed cap on city council salaries. That bill is going to be heard in the subcommittee on House, Counties, Cities, Towns, and House, Counties, Cities, Towns Committee on Thursday of this week. It should also be noted, as everyone is aware, there were a number of gun and gun rights issues. All House committee votes were held on Friday, January 24th. Those bills will be proceeding. The bills will go to the full House for a vote likely next week before going to the Senate, which has already passed some gun control bills of their own. And so we will expect some of those to come up shortly. With regard to Portsmouth-related matters, we have House Bill 391 offered by Delegate Scott, which was the bill on food stamps and eligibility and drug-related felonies. That bill has been incorporated with another delegate's bill, and that's been sent on to subcommittee. It's on the Committee for Health, Welfare, and Institutions. Of course, Senator Lucas and Delegate Scott have a number of bills as it relates to the lottery and the regulation of casinos. Those have been assigned to, on the House side, it's been assigned to the General Law Subcommittee on ABC and Gaming. On the Senate side, the bill has been referred to the Committee on Commerce and Labor. We also have a bill, House Bill 1052, where we have had some local interest. It deals with telecommunication services for local governments, and those bills are also progressing. Delegate Heritage, and I believe Senator Lucas had companion bills on broadband service authority for localities, and those bills have been, it looks like they're headed towards at least being tabled for this session. There's been some difficulty in terms of getting both the telecommunication companies, the cable companies, and the patrons to get together, and so it looks like for this year those matters will be sidelined. There's a Telephone Privacy and Protection Act. I believe that's being sponsored by Senator Lucas, and I believe Delegate Heritage on the other side with regard to identifying individuals on the telephone call where we have spoofing phone calls throughout the city. I believe those bills are being referred to the, Senator Lucas's bill is being referred to the Committee on Commerce and Labor, and I believe Delegate Heritage's bill is also moving forward. I think we received earlier updates with regard to Senate Bill 350, the Emergency Shelters Upgrade Assistance Grant. That grant funding bill has been read for the third time and passed by the Senate, so that's probably the furthest along of the legislation coming out of the city of Portsmouth. And so that's our update as it relates to legislation pending before our General Assembly this week.
Any questions, Solomon? You have a question?
Mayor, I did. I just wanted to ask about, can you elaborate on the, or is this something that you can, the House Joint Resolution 101?
I can.
Okay.
That's a joint resolution that asks JLARC to do a study of the Elizabeth River crossing, the tunnels, the tolls, the possibility of the state taking over the contract. That resolution was put in 2018 and 2019. The 2019, the then Speaker of the House put his foot down saying there will be no new studies because of the great backlog of studies from JLARC. Not to be outdone, Delegate Heritage was able to get, working with the governor's office, to get language in the budget bill, legislation through the budget narrative, in the veto session, which directed the governor and the Secretary of Transportation to undertake such a study. That study got implemented this year. That group actually met in here. The state has hired top drawer consultants because they needed a legal team to look at the contract, to take it apart, to understand what the contract is. They also have retained the nation's premier P3 expert. It's a very interesting contract, and in the process, I think we now know more about the contract than ever. That was a $2 billion project, the ERC project. $1 billion was put up in cash. Most of that money came from the state. The balance came from the developer. There was $1.1 billion worth of debt. About $440 million of that debt was the TIFIA loan from Federal Department of Transportation. The balance was over $600 million worth of private activity revenue bonds, in which the tolls from the revenue go to pay the debt, and the tolls from the revenue go to pay off the the TIFIA loan. So one would think if you could wipe out the debt, you could wipe out the tolls, but it's not that simple as it relates to the contract. The contract says if the state wants to terminate the contract, in addition to taking care of the debt, the state's got to pay the developer, the concessionaire, the profit that the concessionaire would have earned from that point to the end of the contract. And then you net present value that and you discount it. And so that starts a debate about what discount rate to use. And then the state has to pay the fair market value of the asset as it exists today. Now, the state's already accepted the new tunnel, the Midtown Tunnel, but this is not widely known. That tunnel is leaking. You can't tell it when you go through, but it is not in the type of shape that a public entity would want to take over. So this is a process that's pretty dynamic, and the state's doing this already. If this resolution passes, that's okay. That JLARC study would be folded into the governor's study. But the study that's contemplated in this resolution has already been launched and well underway, and there's a great body of knowledge that's being collected. Add to that, ERC is for sale. And think about that dynamic. And so there are all sorts of possibilities. And it feeds into another piece of legislation, House Bill 1438, which is a bill that would authorize the Commonwealth to issue what's called 9C bonds, which are revenue bonds, for the managed hot lanes that are being contemplated for Hampton roads. And if you visualize coming east on 64, about at Jefferson Boulevard, somewhere in there, hot lanes would start and go all the way around to Bowers Hill. Now they need to not stop at Bowers Hill, but go through Bowers Hill, up 664, over to Hampton, Newport News, and back over to. Those hot lanes are what's called managed lanes to make sure that all this construction that's being done doesn't end up in gridlock once they're built. That legislation is about 180 degrees from where the members of the TPO think it should be. That legislation has the Commonwealth collecting the revenue and keeping the revenue. The TPO's position, and remember the TPO is the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization, which we're a member of, is of the opinion that HR TAC should be the concessionaire, should collect the revenue. So that legislation, at the very least, needs to be amended so that it includes the other segment from Bowers Hill over to the peninsula. There's another bill, HB 1726, which is kind of in our package. We have had, and it's in this year's package, a statement that we want the state to come up with an independent source of revenue for public transit. And we have discussed this here, that public transit is becoming more of an issue as it relates to economic development. It was one of the things that Amazon had in its profile for HQ2. It's what's considered when DOD and Congress looks at BRAC. You know, if we can't get our workers to name the base or the post, then, you know, we may not need this post. HB 1726 creates 3 new sources of revenue. The revenue would be collected by the HR TAC, really about the state, but going to HR TAC as the fiscal agent, and then HRT. One is a grantor's tax of 15 cents per 100, and that's when you sell real estate. So that's one of those many numbers that ends up on the real estate closing list.
Is that just for Hampton Roads or for the?
It would go for the footprint of HR tax. Okay. Northern Virginia already has a grantor's tax for transit, and the governor's put in a bill to increase that from 15 cents to 20 cents. So this is not new area that the state's looking at. The second is a transit occupancy tax, AKA the hotel tax. And the idea is that we have a big tourist industry. Tourists help add to the congestion. Let's help them. Let's get them to help pay for congestion relief. The third tax is what I call the Uber tax. And it's not a tax, it's a service fee on those companies like Uber and Lyft and whatever. You might call it a sales tax. Now, the argument is nobody likes taxes. The realtors don't want the grantor's tax. The hotel folks don't want But again, these are revenue sources that have been used in other parts of the state. The Uber's new, the Uber tax. And if truly we are going to have a regional transportation system that works, we need to have these sources of revenue. So those are two bills that that we're concerned about because we're very much into the game on those bills. And the reason I'm not trying to sound like a know-it-all, but I have spent, last night when he came into my office, I was on the telephone with Richmond about what was going on.
Sure.
I will be going up to speak to J 101 tomorrow, and then Thursday morning with the Hampton Roads Caucus, and then a meeting with the Secretary of Transportation with the other mayors about the ERC matter. The casino bills look like they're moving along. There were two major issues. One was the tax rate, and it looks like we have agreement on the tax rate, and it's going to be plateaued. For example, the tax rate would be X if it was this much revenue, X plus Y this much, X plus Y plus Z if it's with that much. And in each case, as you go to a higher level of plateau, the amount of money that comes back to the city increases. The second part was, and this comes out of the JLARC study, Chapter 6, that says we think that there should be a formal RFP process to select a developer. Well, we had our process. I mean, we looked
Every
at
city's had their
yeah, and
process.
every city. So it's universal that each of the 5 cities that's mentioned. And it looks like they're going to raise the ceiling on the historic horse race machines. That's a ceiling that's established as $3,500. And that is a concession to Rosie's in New Kent County to make sure that they're on board and happy with the casino.
And Hampton.
In Hampton. Of course, Hampton wants his own casino. And the position of the 5 cities is, wait.
John, is there any, with the ERC being for sale, who buys something like that? A REIT or something like that?
Probably, this is a consortium. It's just like VIG. VIG is a consortium of a pension plan in United Kingdom and an infrastructure company in the United States. And ERC is a similar type consortium, so it would be a consortium.
Something.
But the fact that it's for sale is an opportunity. I mean, it's an opportunity for people to really think hard about how we could bring this into a public entity that's managed.
Better.
Yeah.
Any other questions of me, council?
Sure.
Thank you.
But we need to talk so much.
No, Mayor, thank you, sir.
Good information.
Since we're talking about the legislative issue, is anybody going to VML next week? I know we have our retreat the next day.
Yes. I have to go because I'm on the VML executive committee,
Right.
so I'll go up the night before. But I encourage everybody, we had such a good delegation last year. If you could make it,
Yeah.
go.
It's
just
the
hard to take
retreat
off
is
Thursday
next
and
day.
Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we have our retreat on Friday and Saturday, which kind of leads us to the next. If you can go,
Well, I'm signed up to go. I think I'm the only one.
Did I sign up?
It's 4 of you go.
Oh, it's, okay.
I thought I signed up.
You and Mr. Battle, Mrs. Lucasburg, and the mayor, of course.
Okay.
okay? Retreat?
Yes, sir. For the benefit of everyone listening, the City Council retreat is scheduled for Friday, February the 7th and 8th at the Wakefield 4-H Center. City Council members, this week you are scheduled for one-on-one interviews and or meetings with consultants that I assume that Ms. White is scheduling for you.
We come to city manager's report and report backs. I think the agenda is pretty self-explanatory.
It is, yes.
Vice Mayor Lisa Lucasberg will give the invocation. Thank you. And we have the ordinance on second reading. Does anybody have any questions on the agenda?
No, sir.
Report backs,
I do have a report back.
please.
This comes from the 2021 budget community engagement hearing, public hearing that we had on January 6th. Status update for items that were discussed and information that came back from the polling. Allocate funds for toll release program. City participates in state's tolling relief program for Portsmouth citizens. It also said allocate more funds to education. School funding formula joint meeting will be held on February the 10th. Poverty Task Force, funding is in the FY 2020 budget for this project. Public safety, talent and retention acquisition presentation for city employees will be done at your upcoming retreat. Port Norfolk Recreation Center, municipal footprints, city council retreat, this will be part of your report as well. Allocate funds to historic neighborhoods. The neighborhood incentive grant funding will continue in the 2021 budget. Another subject was drainage, sidewalks, and curbs. That will be presented to you in an upcoming public works session. Field spaces that have no access to public means for public transit. Staff is working with HRT to come up with a configuration for this request. Move inmates to regional jail when they reach the Department of Justice standards. City Attorney's Office is working on this. Have Sheriff Department serve as staff at Hampton Roads Regional Jail. That is also another project for the City Attorney's Office. Create a medical coding and billing program with Tidewater Community College students ages 14 and 17. We have down for Portsmouth Public Schools. I assume that would be an issue that they would deal with. Add a dog park in the rectangular parcel in front of Paradise Creek. City Council has already approved dog park on January 27th. And the last one says allocate funds for retirees. Finance and Human Resources Department are working on that.
These are all things that came up at the
At the
budget.
last one.
This brings us to any questions? Any council liaison reports? We'll start. Elizabeth.
The Port and Industrial Commission, which met this morning, will have a presentation of interest, I think, to everybody at the February meeting by some folks from the Navy who are working on this excess property, particularly over near Scott Annex. We have folks from the PPIC who've been working and taking tours with them, and they have property they're working on. They They can't accept cash for it, but they can accept in-kind services. And I think that will be a very important meeting for us to hear. The PPIC and the EDA are going to have a joint planning retreat together in March, on the 19th of March, and in lieu of their normal monthly March meeting. So I think that will be something to look forward to. And the Military Affairs Group is starting to work on their hard on bands for the upcoming Memorial Day parade.
Thank you. Paul?
Behavior Health Care and Social Services will be making their report in the upcoming meetings. Therefore, they were asking me to allow them to do it.
Okay.
The Planning Council. The Planning Council has coupled with the Housing Authority to distribute vouchers to the homeless. And also they're seeking a way to try and get landlords to take the vouchers because of the poor record that the tenant has in living and taking care of the properties. They kind of shy away from it. So I suggested that they, most of those folks to get the vouchers are teenagers and young folk, and maybe we need a course for them to take on how to live and how to take care of your properties, independent living skills, et cetera, and an agency staff that checks on them periodically.
Thank you. Bill?
I attended the PPIC also. I think one significant thing referenced the property is the funding for the scope of work and the environmental study of the properties. That part has already been funded, so I think that's a significant step. I also attended the Historic Preservation Commission meeting. You know, that particular commission, we don't hear much of that except when something ends up for us to decide on whether it should be a slate roof or a asphalt shingled roof. But you know, the agenda was a very long agenda. Had the usual window issues to improve, to approve roof situations. Had some new construction going on in Craddock, which is a positive. We tend to forget that commission is there to maintain the integrity of our historic districts. And if that, I think we've ascertained that maintaining that integrity is certainly important to us. But they have some concerns. They're put into a position a lot of times of denying you, approving me for the same materials. Perhaps you did it on the weekend, and so you get a pass. I went through the permit process, and I come before the commission, and I get denied. That's not a good situation. It's not a fair situation. So what I suggested to the commission, they're going to make note of some of the challenges that they're having in that area, plus the need to update the material specifications. As we know, that changes from every few years as new materials come to the market. But they're going to work on that. But I think once that work is finished, I think we need to have a joint meeting with the commissioners to hear firsthand some of the challenges that they are facing and some of the solutions that they feel like we should address. Everything from the weekend work factor that some other cities have already addressed. But I'll keep you abreast as to when they feel like they're ready to meet.
Mayor, I forgot the fort, but you were there, so you can handle that.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you. All right, Lisa.
Okay, start with PRHA, met last week, and their information that they would like to share, brought up in their meeting was one of the commissioners, who is the resident commissioner, Ms. Ricks, mentioned that there has been a round of shootings in their community, and she mentioned that she and her grandchildren had to get down on the floor a couple weeks ago because of the shootings, and they're finding out that they're young adults, young youth, for people who are doing the shootings, and they're terrorizing the communities and the senior persons that live out there. So the whole concern was that one of the commissioners, Miriam Jiggets, wanted to have a sit-down meeting with the chief of police, and I told her we could get before Dr. Patton. I think they already have some meetings that that may have been been addressed with that, but they just wanted to try to find out what more of a presence they could get. I mean, everybody's suffering with that kind of presence, and even how it would be funded, because they themselves were having some struggles with keeping their security officers in their public housing area.
Started that last
So
night.
we heard the presentation from it, so it's just a problem everywhere. And I did mention to her the incentive that we got in our last briefing about trying to recruit additional officers, and we just needed some patience, and we just can't bum rush our chief and get it fixed overnight. That there are communities, and I say that it's not just public housing communities. There are my communities and your communities and all of the communities. So we have the same kind of issues. Saw an email that came recently from out in Churchland area in that community where the young people were terrorizing the neighbors. But so that was their major concern. They're still on track with their development. They have had the developer who is going to develop the Seaboard Square area to pay more earnest money, and so we should see some action in that area right next to Seaboard Square coming on board soon. And some other things that they're working on with some development, which we'll hear about probably when we have our joint meeting with them. Meeting that I went to today with Stop Inc. Of course, this year they're looking to change their stakeholders luncheon to a gala. So they'll be sending out information to that, a silent auction, trying to just change the whole way that they market that. So we'll get some information and hope Portsmouth can support that. And also they did last year something which was called a community needs assessment, and they went around to all of the communities, and Portsmouth was one of the localities that they did, and they got really good participation from the citizens in the community, so determine what their needs are, what they're needing help with, and of course Stop Inc., one of their mission statements that they have is the E2H2, which is education, employment, health, and housing. So that's a real concern, and it was also a concern with PRHA because what they're finding is that felons who've had drug-related cases are having difficulties getting housing and also assistance when they're out. And of course, all know that I was in Richmond yesterday for the General Assembly session, and Senate Bill 124, which Senator Mamie Locke was the patron on, that passed, and that takes a look at the TANF funding, which allows those persons who had drug-related felons to at least be able to get some TANF assistance, because they find that they have barrier crimes, they can't get employment, they can't get housing, they can't get food assistance, and so the recidivism happens and they go back into the penal system. So that's a concern with Stop Inc. It's the same with PRHA, and of course this is a concern with us too, because we're dealing with those issues with people trying to survive. And then my last piece, Nate and I are eagerly awaiting the presentation of the formula funding so that we can know what that is. We want to be able to proceed with the school board. We waiting on our city attorney to give us an update as well on the allocation because I've gotten questions from some of the school board members on when we may be able to proceed with that.
Thank you. Questions? Nate?
I don't have any tonight.
Jen?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to let everyone know that the newest president of Tidewater Community College, Dr. Marshall Constant, has taken over effective January the 1st. I had an opportunity to talk with her briefly at the Urban League breakfast, MLK breakfast, and we are going to set up a time, myself, the mayor, and Dr. Michelle Woodhouse to meet with Dr. Constant so that we can all work together to improve Tidewater Community College, help her be successful.
Thank you. This morning, the Port Authority had a meeting, and they announced a lease with Ørsted. Ørsted is the Scandinavian firm that is in the wind energy business. The announcement was that Ørsted will lease 40 acres of Portsmouth Marine Terminal as lay-down area. And it's the portion that's at the northwest corner, which is kind of the right there adjacent to the Midtown Tunnel. And so it's actually 3 parcels of land. Depending on the size of crane that they bring in for these monster blades, they may have to plow. The state has committed $40 million to improve PMT. And so the governor was there this morning for the announcement. John Reinhardt had invited Portsmouth officials, myself, our economic development team, to be there. It's a big deal. The statistics show that, or predict that over the next decade, from 2020 to 2030, that offshore wind will be go from essentially zero to a $70 billion business with thousands of high-skilled jobs. And so think about this. We're already mile marker 0 in the intercoastal waterway. We could become the center of the universe for the wind to energy business. And this fits into everybody's goal to move away from fossil fuels, coal and natural gas and fuel to make electricity, to renewable energy. And so it was a good day for Portsmouth. Last week, the governor was in Portsmouth again for the Elizabeth River Project. That's the nonprofit that's cleaning up the river. Annual luncheon where they recognize businesses. After that, though, there was a groundbreaking ceremony at the shipyard, the Navy Yard, in which they're spending $200 million to renovate and rehab Dry Dock 4, which is 100 years old. Now, think about this. That's $200 million worth of waterfront improvement there. We've already had last summer in July the conclusion of $320.5 million waterfront improvement at Vig, which doubled the size of Vig, which allowed now for areas of PMT to be repurposed. That's $500 million that other people have invested on the waterfront in Portsmouth.
And we
And I
learned
want-
this morning that a lot of that contract for that $240 million
Was
went to
local.
W.F. McGann,
Yeah.
a Portsmouth company.
And you know, you kind of want to brag and say, okay, other port cities and Hampton Roads,
What you
where's
doing?
your $500 million worth of improvements? And so it's people are investing in Portsmouth, even if it is governmental entities. They're creating jobs and helping the economy. I thought it was really cool that in the background of that was the W.F. McGann sign. which is a Portsmouth company. The, oh gee, there was one more thing. The planning district has a coastal resiliency subcommittee that has been meeting and trying to understand what lies ahead as it relates to sea level rise. And one of the thoughts that came out of the most recent meeting, which was this week, we have a long-standing structure for transportation. There's a group of folks that get up every day and come to work, whether it's in Richmond or wherever it might be, who think about transportation. We don't have that for flooding. And let's not call it sea level rise, because flooding, the town of Grundy had to relocate in the western part of the state because it got flooded out. So flooding is just not a eastern part of the state, it's a whole state issue. And some thought ought to be given to a structure, an infrastructure of people in the state government that would have the responsibility of getting up every day and thinking about flooding. And flooding is an issue. When our streets flood and people can't get to work, it causes a lot of consequences. Flooding could create our coop to be activated. There was a photograph in his presentation. Did you all see that? Gee whiz. So, lastly, and this is really an important, SIPSA has a contract with Wheelabrator to take the solid waste that's collected from the members of SIPSA, which includes the military installations, and take it to the RDF facility in Portsmouth, where it is turned garbage into a fuel that is burned in the power plant that creates steam for the Navy and electricity that's put on the grid at whatever the market price is. The Navy has announced that when its contract with Wheelabrator expires in 2022, it's not going to renew the contract. And let me pause there for a second. You all know that I went up with Harumpha to the Department of Defense back in late fall. My two takeaways, and I've briefed counsel on this before, two things, is that DOD is looking at every one of its facilities through the lens of what value does it bring to national defense and to world peace. And the second lens is how sustainable is that base, that post, that military installation? How long can it survive without water or without sanitary sewer or without electricity? And so the goal of DOD is to make all of its military installations self-sustaining, that they don't have to rely on a second or third party for these critical items.
Like a Wheelabrator.
Like a Wheelabrator. So it's been announced that Navy has signed a $402 million contract with a contractor, a private contractor, who will come inside the fence of the shipyard and take out a 250-car parking lot and build a new steam plant. And it's under a part of the Defense Department authorization that the DOD doesn't have to put up any money up front. The contractor puts the money up. The contractor recovers the capital expense through the sale of steam. And so think about this. If Navy is paying Wheelabrator X for steam now, there's not much of a capital recovery cost in that because that plant is already paid for. There might be some maintenance cost. But under the new contract, they got to pay for the cost of the steam, they got to pay for the capital recovery cost, and then this contractor is not doing it for fun. This contractor's not being altruistic, so the contractor's going to have a profit. And so it's got to cost the Navy more. And we learned about this week. We had a meeting yesterday over at SIPSA with Harumfa. We need to meet with the Navy, meet with our congressional delegation. We've learned about this, happened to be on the day that the governor was in town last week, and so Bobby Scott knows about it. Bobby and I talked to Navy officials that day at the groundbreaking. We need to have a meeting with Admiral Chip Rock, who is the commanding officer he's the guy that manages all the Navy real estate in the Mid-Atlantic. And the Mid-Atlantic is essentially everything on the East Coast except for Washington, and it goes as far west as Illinois. But Wheelabrator is a huge water customer, and assuming that, well, somebody's going to have water to make steam, so that customer may become the contractor, but they're also a decent taxpayer. And so we need to be concerned about whether or not Wheelabrator as a going concern can make it after 2022.
The contract been signed?
I don't know. I think it probably has from what I've read. And what I read is still in line. So it's not like it has been that it's top secret classified information. It's a huge surprise. I mean, nobody's called me up, or I understand the city manager's office and said, hey, we're thinking about doing this.
I'm surprised Wheelabrator didn't communicate that.
Well, Solomon's one of our representatives. We have two. We have one that's appointed by the governor, and that's Luke McCoy. Then we appoint Solomon. Have I done this justice?
You have, Mayor, members of City Council. This issue originally came up in the observation of the governmental process for this steam plant. And so then the questions started going through SIPSA as to what the results.
Their environmental notice that they put in the paper.
Correct. And so in order to, much like any type of development or construction, you collect permits and make notices and that sort of thing. So it was observed from a notice standpoint, and then the questions started with SIPSA and the Navy to get sort of confirmation whether this was a redundant measure, whether this was in addition, or whether this was in substitution. And as the mayor said, we now know as of today, they intended for substitution. And so as I gave you all email a little bit earlier, Ms. Tremere, Dr. Patton, and I are going to put together a presentation for the retreat to sort of suss all of the issues that come back. And just to give you all a little bit of a flashback, I would say we're going to have a little taste of 2015 all over again.
Let me elaborate on that, but before I do, at our meeting yesterday at SIPSA of the parties on trying to figure out what's the best next step, I asked Admiral Quigley, who's the executive director of Harumfa, to call the state's Secretary of Defense and Veterans Affairs, which is Carlos Hopkins. When I saw the governor this morning, I asked the governor had he had a chance to talk with Secretary Hopkins, and he said that he had, and that they're on it. And I told the governor that this is a big deal. And it's a big deal because not only of the impact on Wheelabrator, but if Wheelabrator goes away, we lose a transfer station. And try to locate a transfer station, it falls in that not my backyard syndrome.
We experienced that.
And then, what do you do with the trash that you collect? You can't let it just sit on the side of the road. Well, then the landfill. Suffolk has said, and is that we're not going to let future expansion of the SIPSA landfill in Suffolk to take place until there's a flyover on the Swamp Road on 58 for the traffic that's coming from the west going east and having to make a left turn across those lanes of traffic. There was a fatality last year, and it happened to be a SIPSA employee. And we have a traffic accident on that road. That is our corridor. That's the gateway to the western part of our city.
It is.
It shuts down both east and west traffic.
Yep.
And so it's like a ripple. It's like a domino. I'm not sure that the Navy understands all the unintended consequences. The steam plant that's being proposed is going to be fired by natural gas as the primary source, and by oil as the second, the backup. Well, that natural gas has got to come from somewhere, and so they're not totally sustainable unless the Navy's going to be mining and wheeling its own natural gas, which is not going to be the case. The point that I think needs to be made too is that there has been no reliability issues with Wheelabrator as far as meeting the Navy's power needs. They haven't had labor shutdowns, they haven't had equipment failures. They come in and make the steam and it flows.
Has there been a cost analysis of Wheelabrator's steam production versus the anticipation of the new company?
No, not yet. And that's something that needs to be done. I mean, just intuitively, like I said, it's got to be.
Yeah.
It's got to
You
be.
would think.
Yeah, because you can't. Think about a project that's $402 million. Let's say let's say the bricks and mortar is $350 million. It's going to take a long time to recover that.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to have a super good surcharge on the cost of your steam to recover that capital cost. Anyway, that's the news. You mentioned schools, and Paul called me over the weekend and asked if we could discuss school funding. And so, Paul, you have the floor. We have the time.
Well, I think that we need to go ahead and release the $2.9 million that the school board requested. I think we've been, as the council, past and present, kind of infringing upon the autonomy of the school board. I know we are the funders, and we control the purse, but just as we have a certain amount of autonomy, they have a certain amount of autonomy. And I think that, we should just back off unless we really, really see problems that, can't be answered. Then those situations will automatically correct themselves. But I believe in the integrity of the folks. I'm respecting the fact that they were elected by our city, and I just want to, make a motion that we go ahead and release those funds.
Are you talking about the funds that are in the insurance
Yes,
fund?
and
Okay.
insurance.
The way the city code reads, my recollection is that they have to submit a claim, and that claim is reviewed by the city attorney
Yes, sir.
as a ministerial act. And so it's much like me having my car insurance company is USA, and I file a claim with them. I've got to have the details in the claim before they'll pay the claim. Are you saying that we should pay the claim without knowing the details?
Well, I'm speaking about autonomy, and what I'm saying is, I feel like they're adult enough and professional enough to manage the funds. I don't think the state cares whether we manage it or they manage it. So, like I said, it's about autonomy to me and not treading on their territory. And that's why I think we should allow them to manage their funds for their liabilities.
Our liaisons?
Yeah, I mean, well, we suggested that our attorney take a look at what the claims were and present back to us. I believe that there's some hold up with that process, but we had thought that it would be done, I thought that it would be done in January, and that we move into February now, and we're going to be having our funding formula presentation coming up soon, but we need to have a meeting with them because we have been delaying this meeting until we can have the conversation. And so, I need to know where we are so that we can, proceed with at least the reappropriation, or either if they've submitted the claims, one or the other. Something needs to go back to them before we get too far into February.
Can you give us a status report on the claims?
Certainly, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of Senate Council. Let me start with the last communication first. On January 14th, I sent a text message to Mr. Falk. I mentioned to him that I was mindful that they were meeting on the 23rd and that council collectively and the liaisons specifically had expressed an interest in getting this issue resolved in the month of January. And so I asked them again for their a response with regard to some questions I had asked about the documentation they provided. I have not gotten a response from Mr. Falk since the 14th. Again, I was mindful of the critique that was made prior to the holidays, the Christmas holidays. And so, as you all are aware, in emails I sent, I made myself available for every day the city was open over the holidays. I understood that the school system was out for a period of time. I understood at one point in time when I heard that Mr. Falk was back in town, I gave it a few days. I understood the CAFR report came from the school system back to the city finance department. So I presumed that might have been the delay. And then when the 14th came, because again, the legal obligation is for me to report the claim back to the school board, I knew the 23rd was that first opportunity to do so. So on the 14th is when I sent the email saying, please get back with me. I have not heard anything any further with regard to that. I did not send a communication to the whole school board because my communication has been with the CFO up until this point, and with the exception of when Mr. Parent started communicating directly with me over the holidays. And so, as I have said to some of my questions are rudimentary. They should take 5 minutes to answer. Some may have taken some other period of time for research. But what I would say is, in order to meet the requirements of that code, which is unexpected losses, there's some questions that have to be answered. And I have given some ways. The school board did provide a significant amount of documentation, so I asked some questions about those, and I asked for some what I would call qualitative/quantitative data that would give some indication if they had an exceptional year.
Did they give you an answer to that?
None of them. I have not received an answer to any of the sort of qualitative questions, or even with regard to some of the categories I asked about. I asked a simple question: is the school board on a cash or accrual basis as it relates to that particular set of documents? I haven't even gotten that answer, which
Should have been an easy one.
as I say, I've got Miss Wood's 11th grade accounting from Norcom High School. I'm not asking PhD type questions. It's just, are you guys on cash or accrual, and help me understand some of the things that were submitted. And so, but I haven't gotten those responses. And so I am constantly understanding the critique on the delay on the front end. I'm awaiting their response so that I can quickly return that to them at their date. And my objective was to get in front of them on the 23rd, but I haven't gotten a response.
Any other comments?
No, I think, until we get a response back from them on it, we have to wait. I didn't want it to be this long, but there's clearly some issue that's going on that can't be responded to, and so we need to find out what that is.
Yeah,
Would it
we
be-
want you to move quickly, but
Yeah.
Would it be useful to reiterate your questions in a memo or a letter that you can hand deliver tomorrow to them?
I can certainly do that.
How about if we do that?
yeah, at the direction of
Yes.
council to
Right.
get on the stick,
Right.
you need to do that.
I will do that.
All right. That concludes our agenda. This work session is adjourned. Do we have a need for a closed session?
No, sir.
Okay, we'll leave. We'll come back to the meeting in a second.